Alright, I'm just gonna cut right to the point. I could sit here and bore you with the intricacies of soundtracks being an emotional extension of scenes and talk about John Williams and Hans Zimmer, but to be completely honest, I am not interested in any of that. What I'm interested in is the outliers. The Saw soundtracks, Resident Evil, Skrillex doing sound design work for Transformers, the Burnout games, the Motorstorm games, all of the Tony Hawk games. I mean, Freddy vs. Jason literally has this song during its end credits. I feel like not enough people are talking about this. I mean, look at me. Did you expect me to talk about Orchestras, the Jurassic Park theme? No, I'm gonna talk about Limp Bizkit in the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack because I'm cultured. But enough preamble, let's begin. In my opinion, there is nothing cooler than when a movie hands off its soundtrack to a band or an artist that you wouldn't typically expect, but ends up fitting extremely well. Like Daft Punk doing the soundtrack for Tron, the soundtrack for X by Chelsea Wolfe, Beck doing most of the songs for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, or Ween's surprising amount of influence on SpongeBob. But personally speaking, I get a huge kick out of more novelty needle drop moments like Cannibal Corpse and Ace Ventura, Full of Hell and the Art of Self-Defense, House of Wax just randomly dropping My Chem for the credits, Mastodon and Monsters University, Napalm Death and the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, and Death Grips being featured in Atlanta, Westworld, and a Battlefield game for some reason. All features that are both unexpected, kind of funny, and surprisingly fitting. A lot of people have totally forgotten about this, but Korn's I Did My Time is a song originally made for the Tomb Raider sequel, Lara Croft and the Cradle of Life. And I'm not joking either, by the way. This is the official cover art for the single. The music video quite literally has Lara Croft in it. It's just such a forgettable movie that everyone thought it was just a cool Angelina Jolie feature, just randomly. My Chemical Romance did a cover of Bob Dylan's Desolation Row for the movie Watchmen, which is not only a genuinely fantastic cover, but the music video for it is just so damn good. It's directed by Zack Snyder, which not only gives it a really unique vibe, but it also makes it feel grounded in the same reality that the movie itself takes place in. And regardless of how you feel about Snyder, the fact that he directed this is actually pretty cool. And we can't talk about in-universe music videos without talking about Decode, one of Paramore's best songs on a soundtrack that has no right being this good. And I know I'm primarily focusing my attention towards very band-centric examples, but I have to include Seal's Kiss from a Rose Batman Forever music video. The song was featured on the soundtrack, but the music video just makes it look like he's singing a love song to Batman, and it feels like a fan edit, but it's somehow real. But the song itself was originally released on the music from and inspired by the Neverending Story 3 soundtrack, but I'm sure we all knew that already. Maximum the Hormone contributed both opening and ending themes to Death Note, and it objectively kicks so much ass. And regardless of how you feel about anime or whatever, just look at them, dude. They're legends for a reason, and their energy is unmatched. These songs kinda just straight up rule. They even wrote a song based off of the Dragon Ball Z character Frieza that was so good that it is credited as both inspiring the title and concept of the film Dragon Ball Z Resurrection F. They literally made a soundtrack so good, it willed a movie into existence around it. Do you see why I had to make a video talking about soundtracks? There's so much cool shit, man. I don't care about Dragon Ball Z at all, and that's amazing. However, heavy music is not just a novelty or something you play for 5 seconds on the radio or when some characters walk into a dodgy bar. Heavy music is great at accentuating fast-paced action, high stress, and helps build into power fantasies in a fun, organic way, which is why it gets used a lot in video games. Mick Gordon's work for Doom, Nine Inch Nails doing the Quake OST, Cyberpunk 2077 having a whole slew of artists. It can either be fun and exciting or moody and oppressive. It's way more versatile than I think a lot of people give credit for, especially when it has some kind of electronic element to it. This is because electronic music pretty much universally gets people going and is objectively a little bit more accessible than Tomb Mold. Health is a great example of this, and they have done insanely amazing soundtrack work for everything they've ever touched, which is just so insanely impressive. Noisy did soundtrack work for both the Devil May Cry series as well as Motorstorm Apocalypse, 2 games that are about causing as much damage as you can and doing it as fast as possible. Wreck-It Ralph features an original Skrillex song called Bug Hunt that was never officially released, but for some reason the official soundtrack does contain a noisier remix of said song, meaning Disney owns the rights to a Skrillex song and just decided to make sure no one could ever listen to it. Thanks, Disney. Skrillex also made the original song Syndicate for the 2012 game of the same name, which samples the song Danger from the original 1993 game, which also Never got an official release. Are you seeing a trend here? It's really cool. However, Skrillex also did Reptile's theme, which was featured on a compilation album released in tandem to the 2011 Mortal Kombat game, which did get an official release and was also used for promotional material in both the 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, despite that not making any fucking sense. And according to Wikipedia, it's also the song that was featured in the trailer for the BronyCon version of Child's Play 2. Whatever that means. I can find no evidence of this anywhere. I don't know what it's talking about, but I figured I'd include it. But speaking of compilation albums, a lot of movies in the late 90s and 2000s would have various artists' soundtracks, where instead of having a single composer create everything for the movie score from scratch, there would be an additional amount of needle drops from various bands, not only giving the movie some variety and a little bit of authentic edge, but also putting an additional spotlight on some of the artists, acting as some legitimately good promotion. And it is at this point I found myself going down a rabbit hole by asking myself just a simple question: wait, where did all of this go exactly? Why are all the examples of extreme soundtracks in mainstream Hollywood films and prominent video games like 15 years in the past? I mean, like, the only modern prominent examples of various artists' soundtracks are like the Barbie movie and Guardians of the Galaxy, and only one of those contains music made in the past decade. Some of these examples are recent, but this kind of various artists' fun musical cameos were everywhere in the 90s and 2000s, but it is now extremely few and far between. If Pantera could be on an episode of SpongeBob, then we should be able to get snuffed on sight on an episode of Bluey. Obviously, I'm joking, but like off-the-wall, unexpected features used to be cool, funny, and memorable, so I don't really understand why it's been seemingly dropped entirely. But then I realized it's not just the soundtracks that went away. It's extreme media itself. Like, I remember a time when action movies with some sort of gothic edge to it was inescapable. And like, everyone was wearing leather pants all the time. Like, really, there were a lot of leather pants. And of course, these have a really cool soundtrack, but these aren't getting made anymore. Not unless Jason Statham starts dressing like he's in Hellraiser. Games like Burnout, Guitar Hero, and Tony Hawk are getting phased out by, like, I don't know, Forza, Friday Night Funkin', I guess, and Tony Hawk, but in HD now. Scrolling through channels in 2009, whether you liked it or not, you were going to see Jackass, A Group of People Fighting on Jersey Shore, Fear Factor, 1,000 Ways to Die, and WWE Raw, but now it seems like shows only get picked up if you're already famous, so they could follow you around your mansion that looks like an empty Apple store, capitalizing off of pre-existing IP, or a bloated Netflix docuseries that's not even meant to capture and hold your attention. And even stuff that's not extreme at all and very transparently geared towards young children, things that would be ridiculous to lump into the same category as Jackass, even that got significantly less extreme. Hell, even corporate logos got neutered. What was the PetSmart logo too extreme for the general public? Why did everything get neutered? The notions of extreme, cool, and radical were inescapable, and now its place in mainstream culture has diminished rapidly. I assumed I was just being nostalgic, but the more I looked into it, the more kind of baffling it became. And the next thing I know, I found myself pulling a Roblox oof, and my little 9-minute long video on soundtracks that I think are cool ended up becoming a study on culture and business practices that led to the pretty much near extinction of extreme media's place in the mainstream eye. So anyways, I'm gonna bite off more than I can chew and try and talk about all of it. Here's the second title card. Alright, before we could talk about where we are now, first we have to go all the way back to the 80s for a little bit of oversimplified background information. The 80s were in a lot of ways very conservative and full of family values that eventually everyone kind of started to get sick of it, and in the 90s the media started to swing in the opposite direction and counterculture was kind of inescapable. Wrestling went from a wholesome, family-oriented environment, standard, boring, America #1 type shit, to the Attitude Era Degeneration X and the Undead Undertaker throwing a dude 2 stories high onto the ground below 2 times and then choke slamming him into a pile of thumbtacks. And pretty much anyone who wasn't a baby boomer looked at this shift and thought, wow, this is awesome. People got bored of this ideal, picture-perfect, squeaky-clean depiction and wanted something more real, relatable, and exciting. Because sometimes life is unfair, and a depiction about getting dealt a bad hand in life is going to be infinitely more relatable to more people than whatever the plot of Joey is supposed to be. Even though on paper, one of them is significantly more riskier to greenlight. As with a lot of more counterculture media, if it sticks around for long enough, it usually either burns out or gets tamer and tamer as it gets assimilated into the culture it originally set off to be pushing against. Like, it's so weird that The Rock was once the edgy bad boy when, like, he is the current example of a celebrity being, like, excruciatingly brand safe. But I'm getting way too ahead of myself. There are a billion examples of extreme and radical media slithering its way into the mainstream, but before I can talk about all the nuances of everything and talk more about soundtracks, first let's start small by talking about television. Thanks to places like MTV, VH1, Spike TV, and Comedy Central, it was impossible to channel surf without running into footage of something unpleasant or extreme. Shows like Jackass, Nitro Circus, Wild Boys, Chris Angel's Mind Freak, Viva La Bam, Fantasy Factory, Fear Factor, Ghost Adventures, Monday Night Raw, Deadliest Warrior, 1,000 Ways to Die, and Tosh.0, who was one of my earliest inspirations. Can you tell it's really subtle? Even things like medical dramas and reality TV needed some element of extremity in order to stand out a little bit. Has it aged particularly well? Not really. Most of it is not near as good as you remember, unfortunately, but people were pushing the boundaries. And whether or not you agree with all of the boundaries that got pushed, that is objectively interesting and will lead to creative entertainment. It is also an ethos that a lot of television shows are now seemingly allergic to, but we'll talk more about that later. If we look at this era of television, we could find some similarities and start piecing together what exactly are the ingredients that go into making a piece of media extreme to begin with. The most obvious being edginess and sense of danger. I mean, Jesus Christ, the amount of stuff that was on mainstream television is like so extreme, I don't even know if I could show it on YouTube. We really took this shit for granted, man. I mean, I'm not even being nostalgia pilled right now. It's just objectively crazy the amount of stuff that they were allowing on cable back when that existed. Whenever something starts off with a warning not to do what you're about to see, you know you're in for something good, you know? And no two shows did it better than Jackass and Nitro Circus. Now, we all know about Jackass. You know, if you're the kind of person that watches my YouTube channel, you're the kind of person who's seen all of it. God knows I have. But I am very often surprised by how few people watched Nitro Circus, and I've been looking for an excuse to talk about them, so here we are. If you're unfamiliar with Nitro Circus, the best way to describe it is Jackass plus X Games. More radical, but also significantly more dangerous. Some of its founders and co-creators do include Jeff Tremaine and Johnny Knoxville, who have gone on record to say, "Our Jackass stunts were always designed to fail. Nitro stunts, you have to succeed or you die." Same mother, different daddies. Like, you know in Jackass when someone gets hit really hard and the mood shifts to concern and no one can laugh until they make sure that everyone is okay? Nitro Circus is like that 100% of the time because Jesus Christ, is he paralyzed? Like, you know that classic footage of that one rally car crash that's extremely brutal? That's Travis Pastrana, and he is the host of Nitro Circus, and they even tried to break this record on camera. It's very redneck, very sketchy, and also very painful. Plenty of stuff they even had to do in different countries because it's illegal to do in the United States, and you don't get much more radical than that, you know? Granted, although soundtrack-wise, both Jackass and Nitro Circus aren't really that extreme, the core of what their show is, I do feel like makes it count spiritually. Granted, there is a pretty wide gap between very gothic-inspired movies and soundtracks and the genre of TV that is mostly just a bunch of white trash dudes getting the wind knocked out of them, but I do feel like they exist on opposite sides of the same spectrum of edgy, badass, early 2000s mainstream media that you just don't really see that much of anymore. I mean, hell, dating shows couldn't even just be dating shows. They had to have the dude from Poison in it for some reason. And even Cartoon Network was like, fuck it, destroy, build, destroy, have Andrew WK be the host. What about a show called Dude, What Would Happen? Everything is slightly edgy reality TV, I guess. Another common thread throughout all of these is a very rough around the edges, almost DIY nature to it. Handheld cameras, usually bad quality and scuffed audio. It is noticeably lacking in polish and embracing its unwillingness to play it safe, not just with its concepts, but with its presentation as well. CKY was a precursor to a lot of different things and helped establish this as being a style that's not just feasible, but can also be successful despite like a really low production cost. Since it started off as what is essentially just a homegrown project and it made so much money, it basically set the template moving forward for low budget, really stupid shows. A lot of these shows were also filmed outdoors, which is why I wanted to come out here, but there's mosquitoes, so fuck that, I'm going inside. In addition to its rough around the edges, pseudo DIY nature, a lot of these shows were also somewhat based in reality. Now, I know reality TV is fake, but, you know, these aren't, like, CGI, these aren't doing head replacements on stuntmen, these are real and grounded in reality to at least some degree. These are real people doing real extreme things, and in order for it to count, it has to come from some genuine place. Like Always Sunny's first few seasons had a very homegrown look and feel. Granted, it is a sitcom and it's all scripted, but there is something fundamentally radical about going out and making something on your own or with a group of friends with basically no budget. The nature of it being a sitcom does disqualify it from really counting, but it has a similar grit, you know? Obviously what counts as DIY gets stretched pretty thin, but you get my point. You can't really just get a shopping cart on the middle of a dock and then get jet propelled off of a ramp while your friends laugh and film you, but I mean, if you really wanted to, you probably could. The warnings about not doing the stuff that you're about to see isn't just to cover their ass legally, it's because they were about to show you stuff that you could feasibly do, you know? I'm not saying it's easy or legal or responsible for your health or financially, but it is achievable if you really wanted to, you know? Obviously, some of the things that I mentioned are still ongoing, ended pretty recently, or have some kind of spiritual successor. To say that these are fully gone is inaccurate, but like, you get my point. If the pilots to these shows were being pitched today, I can guarantee the majority of them would not get picked up. New edgy TV shows are still being made, however, it's either the ugliest adult animation you've ever seen, or the most generic-looking Netflix original that no one ever watches, that only gets one season and was only ever pushed in the algorithm for like 6 days. The real, raw, dangerous DIY vibe does not exist in the mainstream culture, like, really at all anymore. Or at least I can't seem to find a single example other than that one David Blaine show I've seen commercials for. Much like how things were built to last back in my day seems like a very nostalgia-driven old man ramble. In reality, it's pretty true, and mainstream culture used to be more extreme, seems very nostalgia-based, but unfortunately, it's true on just a cultural level. Big media conglomerates do not want to take risks on something that might get them yelled at on Twitter, so a lot of it has been relegated to the internet, which even if something crazy does pop off, it's old news after like 48 hours, so these two things combined guarantees that if something edgy does pop off, it has no real staying power. Like, I'm pretty sure the Twisted Tea guy would have been on Ellen and Tosh.0, and there would have been Shmoyoho remixes and t-shirts, but pretty much everyone moved on from it kind of immediately. Without a lot of big media trying to get on board, winning the lottery of internet virality may grant you 5 minutes of fame, but the spotlight will never be on you. The next Bam Margera, the next CKY is happening right here, right now, on some channel you've never heard of that's only getting like 20 views, and it will probably remain that way because sometimes life is unfair. But that's enough talk about TV and society or whatever. Let's shift gears back into soundtracks a little bit by talking about video games. Alright, I figure since I'm going to talk about video games from 2003, I might as well look the part, so this is how I'm going to look now. I should dress like this every day, dude. I look awesome. Now, while most of the examples I've talked about so far have been spiritually radical or extreme, most of the soundtracks associated with it have been kind of a little bit generic. There are some fun occasional theme songs, most notably of which being Jonathan Davis produced the Mind Freak theme and just the overall existence of CKY as a band. But overall, just there's not really a lot of needle drops. It's television, and acquiring licenses to songs is expensive, so outside of acquiring a good theme, it's not really worth it for the moment-to-moment episodes across the entire show. But for video games, all you have are the moment-to-moment experiences. Not only extreme in subject matter and in spirit, but the soundtracks were pumped to the goddamn brim. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, in addition to Underground, features many legendary and badass examples like Guerrilla Radio, No Cigar, Jerry Was a Race Car Driver, Superman, and featuring a ton of bands from Motorhead to the Ramones to Alien Ant Farm, AC/DC, System of a Down, Run DMC, Public Enemy, NWA, and was purposefully included with the intent of trying to separate themselves from other games at the time and to be extra cool. But you don't need me to tell you that the Pro Skater soundtracks are awesome. Everyone knows already. Even Disney just straight up was like, damn, this is cool, we should steal this. But some less talked about examples include ATV Off-Road Fury 1 and 2, which includes Anthrax, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Korn, System of a Down, and it even includes Lost Prophet. Oh. Alright, well besides that, it's really good. Motorstorm has Queens of the Stone Age, Nirvana, Slipknot, Every Time I Die. Its sequel has even more Slipknot, even more Nirvana, this time it's a Diplo remix for some reason. Ministry, Boys Noise, Aphex Twin, In Flames, Machine Head, Clutch, Megadeth, and Noisia again. But since Apocalypse, the third game, is a little bit more grand in scale, they unfortunately dropped the needle drop aspect of the soundtrack and opted for a more cinematic vibe. That was also remixed by Noisia, so it's still badass. And speaking of badass, I know I look pretty cool, but if I'm being honest, I feel really self-conscious due to how stupid I look, so I'm gonna ruin the bit and change, because I don't want to keep doing this. Need for Speed Most Wanted has Diesel Boy, Cell Dweller, Static X, Mastodon, The Prodigy, and just a lot of like really fun drifting away from the police type shit. Mick Gordon's legendary work on Doom and Doom Eternal are so good that it inspired blatant copycats, which is a good thing, by the way. Guitar Hero made such an impact that it inspired Harmonix to create their own copycats and spin-offs, which is a good thing at first, until it became so oversaturated that it killed any interest in the franchise, so much so that oversaturation is literally a bullet point on their Wikipedia page. Nine Inch Nails did the soundtrack for Quake, BMX, XXX features Green Day, Taking Back Sunday, and Motley Crue's Girls, Girls, Girls. Slayer X's soundtrack is by a band called Seepage, a band that exists in-universe within the video game itself, much like Cyberpunk 2077, which I've talked about ad nauseum in this video, in addition to all of these games' soundtracks. The Burnout games include Alice in Chains, Killswitch Engage, Seosin, Census Failed, Trivium, The Sword, Yellow Card, All American Rejects, Bullet for My Valentine, Fallout Boy, Comeback Kid, Mindless Self-Indulgence, 18 Visions, From First to Last, My Chemical Romance, Rise Against, and Atreyu. They even have different language versions of Avril Lavigne's Girlfriend, which at first I thought was kind of funny, but then I realized that that song is actually amazing when paired with violently running cars off the road. And that right there is part of the beauty of all of these games' soundtracks. It's not necessarily about pure music choice or genre or whether or not you're a fan of a particular artist or not. It's about music being an active participant in a piece of media's hell yeah factor. What is hell yeah factor? Well, you know it when you see it. Listening to Skrillex's Make It Bundem while you burn an entire field of weed with a flamethrower? Hell yeah. Listening to Korn while racing ATVs on the back of a moving train? Hell yeah. Listening to 50 Cent while playing as 50 Cent? Hell yeah, dude. Racing motorcycles through active volcanoes while listening to Slipknot and the UI is the bleeding cowboy font? Hell yeah, dude, that is like this beanie made into a video game. Some songs don't even need to be extreme or controversial in order to have hell yeah factor. As I've talked about extensively in this video, it's not just the alternative channels in GTA that help set the vibe. Sometimes drifting through traffic while listening to Britney Spears or that one beeping song is a certified hell yeah moment. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's not just video games. Blade's Blood Rave? Hell yeah. The opening credits to Enter the Void? Hell yeah. Neo coming towards the camera as Wake Up by Rage Against the Machine kicks in. Not only is it badass, but it also is like relevant to the themes of the movie itself. Hell yeah, dude. It's not about cool moments and cool concepts. It's about music being an active participant in elevating those cool moments and cool concepts to be something especially memorable. Nathan Drake climbing off of a crashed train as it actively falls off of a cliff is extremely badass, but music-wise, a little lackluster. So no matter how cool it might be, it's not quite a hell yeah moment. I don't know if anything I'm saying is making sense to anyone, but oh well. Also, it's hot. I'm gonna take off my jacket. The soundtrack for everything matters, but the soundtracks for video games kind of matter even more so. For movies, the audience is a passive participant. You are a passive participant right now. You can't really control anything that's going on screen unless if you pause the video or leave, which I hope you don't. But in video games, the audience is an active participant. Soundtracks can help you feel scared, sneaky, encourage you to go faster, and make you feel empowered. And although movies do this all the time too, it is significantly more effective when you are in the driver's seat. The barrier of the screen gets broken if there's a controller in your hand. Both scary and badass situations hit a billion times harder if you are piloting it. So listening to music that makes you want to move around and do something dangerous in a game that's encouraging you to take risks, it is a combination that just hits so unbelievably hard. And the best thing is, these weren't just games with extreme soundtracks. These were extreme, fast, dangerous, violent, edgy, badass, and radical games with a soundtrack that complements the gameplay. You could put Atreyu in Dress to Impress too, and it would be funny, but like, at the end of the day, these all just feel like they were made for each other. I'm not saying everything needs to have a needle drop moment, but peeling flesh in a fighting game would objectively be amazing. There are entire genres dedicated to making people want to fight, and I know it's a risky creative decision for multi-millionaire game studios, but like, is it really? I think these are just about as good of a match as putting pop punk in the Tony Hawk games, and well, that took off pretty well. And frankly, sometimes picking the safe option makes people mad anyways. Like, no hate to 21 Savage at all, but this is straight up a low energy song. Wouldn't it have been smarter and cheaper to just hire like any beatdown band? Sometimes making something extreme, but not committing to the extremity enough, kind of leaves people wanting more. There are plenty of games that don't really feature extreme soundtracks, but I still think kind of is like falls under the umbrella spiritually. Pretty much all of these games feel like at least one member of the dev team was wearing a Suffocation shirt. You know what I mean? But soundtrack-wise, I feel like all of these games could have pushed the limits a little bit more, in my opinion. Although most horror games from this era, I do feel like share a lot of moody and edgy similarities, much like with movies, which I'll talk about next. I feel like that's mostly a byproduct of genre and not necessarily a good representation of radicalness at its core. It's kind of hard to describe, but you know the vibe when you see it. Dark themes explored in a way that feels fun, and like the people behind it had a genuine interest in it, and any sort of alternative references don't really feel forced. They feel like they organically take place within the world, which is something you can just smell when it's inauthentic. During this time, however, the lines did get a little bit blurry. This was the era when games were less so marketed by, this game is fun, and more so marketed by, John Romero is going to make you his bitch, and making Mario look mad for some reason. Terminal reality even included boxing across the street from E3 just to be provocative, and also because gaming in the early 2000s was so tied to the objectification of women that they were just kind of inseparable. And if anyone's like, oh, you're a sensitive snowflake, go watch the early installments of the Game Awards. It's like, wow, dude, we get it. Obviously, plenty of aspects of this have not aged the best. It was very much a product of its time, very Axe body spray-esque, but there was a cultural obsession with shock and sex and looking at authority and going, hey, buddy, check this out. And even though a lot of the times it was juvenile and outdated in its execution, I think if the core of this ethos was updated for modern times, I think it would be equally as effective. But instead, you know, we get a cozy farm simulator. That's cool, haven't seen one of those before. A lot of these games also have a kind of rough around the edges vibe to it due to the hardware limitations at the time. Canon's renderware engine was one of the under the hood aspects that made a lot of early 2000s radical extreme video games feel like it had similar DNA, because it kinda did. Renderware was not originally designed with video games in mind, but it was good enough and cheap enough that in the early 2000s it was the place to be, even though it hasn't particularly aged the best. But as we already established, in order for something to feel radical outside of its themes and concepts, it needs to have some jank. It needs to have some crust. It needs to be held together with duct tape, but miraculously prevail despite that. It is pretty much impossible for something to feel like a lovingly crafted, slightly edgy, and rough around the edges passion project while also looking perfectly photoreal. Aesthetically, it clashes. I'm pretty sure Kojima is the only one who could pull it off. I'm generalizing, of course, but a good rule of thumb is in order for something to feel authentically extreme or radical, it has to have a little bit of DIY crust on it. And it just so happens that in 2002, Kinda every game looked that way, even though it was really impressive for the time. Games like Bloodborne Kart, the games by Soda Raptor, David Zeminski, and Puppet Combo, Slayer's X, all of these are new games that capture the same radical, authentic expression while having a very retro look. It's not a gimmick, it's not nostalgia, it is frankly sometimes necessary for solo devs, aka, it's DIY. Aren't acronyms fun? But anyways, I've talked about video games for far too long, so now I'm gonna move on to movies. I promise that this video is not nostalgia bait, hit like if you remember the past type shit. I kind of hate those types of videos, if I'm being honest. It is just genuinely worth an entire video by itself how many awesome and unexpected movie soundtracks came out of the 2000s. So let's start with the queen bee of unnecessarily badass soundtracks, Queen of the Damned. If you're unfamiliar with this movie, it is the sequel to Interview with a Vampire, and it kind of had a little bit of a meme moment because the plot on Wikipedia literally begins with the sentence, "The sound of a nu metal band arouses the vampire," and that's just kind of funny. Which is both 1, hilarious, and 2, unironically 10 times more intriguing than another soulless reboot of some bullshit we've already seen. Like, although it is a bit of a meme, the movie does literally begin with a vampire in his slumber for hundreds of years, taking a look at extreme culture and going, damn, I don't think I want to sleep anymore. This shit seems awesome. The dude had no interest in being alive, but then he heard hybrid theory, watched Malcolm in the Middle, played some Quake, and then decided, you know what? I'll stick around for a little bit. And like, despite that being funny, can you blame him? I mean, it makes sense. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit for the sake of humor, but all joking and nostalgia aside, this thought process does kind of check out. I mean, the dude has probably never seen women's ankles before, and now the girls have pink hair, and there's this thing called a computer that you could play Doom on. I'd be interested. And I don't mean to be an edgy asshole, but I can't really see a vampire doing that with today's popular culture, which, granted, I am cherry-picking examples and kind of being cynical, but also, it's not inaccurate either. I really don't want this video to come off as like I was born in the wrong generation Tumblr post or anything, but like, you get what I'm saying, right? I just can't really picture any vampires losing sleep over season 19 of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Paris puppies and pranks, or, you know, missing out on cryptocurrency scams. Like, I know I kind of sound like this, but like, when was the last time you looked at popular culture and went, hell yeah, instead of, oh no? It's been a while, right? Exactly. But anyways, the soundtrack for Queen of the Damned was Jonathan Davis's first musical project outside of Korn, where him and Richard Gibbs would write the music and guest vocalists would appear on each track, in addition to a few needle drop moments that are not only really cool, but also fit extremely well. Like having Deftones' Change play while vampires make out in a bathtub full of rose petals. Sick as fuck, dude. And despite Disturbed and Marilyn Manson being weird and cringe, their musical presence completely unprompted in the middle of a movie was extremely badass in 2004. So for just a moment, let's set aside all the valid criticism and acknowledge that Down with the Sickness playing at a giant festival that looks like Mordor where a giant vampire battle is about to take place. It's kind of a cool combination, you gotta admit. There's a scene in this movie that actually really stuck out for me, despite being very simple. There's a scene where this woman, Jessie, is having her morning coffee and reading a book while listening to Jonathan Davis on a CD player nearby. And although this is a very unremarkable situation, I'm pretty sure this is like the first time a character is listening to metal and it's not played for laughs or purposefully establishing that she's like a rebellious character. It's just someone listening to Korn while they make their coffee. No joke, no nothing. And as silly as it sounds, it's like, oh my god, is this like actual representation? Is that why this era of media feels so uniquely special? Is this the only time where actual representation for more fringe and undesirable groups of people / interests were more normal instead of just being relegated to the bottom of a joke or stereotypes? Is part of this era's radicalness being willing to accept others in a way that current media still kinda clutches its pearls towards? I mean, like, Jackass was, and I'd argue still is, the most homoerotic thing to hit mainstream culture. And as progressive as media has gotten over the years, I feel like there was this kind of like casual, yeah, we do gay stuff sometimes, it's not a big deal kind of attitude that I swear you don't really see that much in current media. Like, the fact that this is not the goth character and this isn't the gay character is kind of really bold, especially for the time period. You see this kind of casualness on like Twitter all the time, but in like media, it's just not near as casual. It's pretty black and white. I know that there are exceptions, obviously, and I'm not quite sure how to put it into words, but like, you get what I mean, right? Anyway, moving forward. But all representation without a negative connotation aside, sometimes there are movies that do have a negative connotation, but at least it's correct. Attila was featured in the movie Hell or High Water, playing loudly from a lime green muscle car driven by a dude with obvious anger issues who starts yelling, "What, bitch?" At someone nearby because they looked at them, before pulling a gun and then getting his ass kicked. Although not a positive connotation, having Attila play makes sense for this character. It's surprisingly accurate. I mean, even the colors match. But one-off little bits aside, there are plenty of soundtracks pumped to the brim with interesting, more provocative choices like Gummo, which features Mortician, Brujeria, Spaz, Sleep, Bathory, and a whole bunch more. The Crow, which features Nine Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, Pantera, The Cure, Stone Temple Pilots, and more. The score for Mandy was produced by Randall Dunn, who has worked with a ton of bands and also features the guitarist of Sun on the soundtrack, which is super cool. End of Days, where Arnold fights the devil, features Korn, Everlast, Limp Bizkit, Guns N' Roses, The Prodigy, Rob Zombie, Eminem, Powerman 5000, and Creed. I think that might be the most 1999 lineup I've ever heard in my life. The Spawn soundtrack, all the Saw movies, Lara Croft, Twilight, Transformers is, I think, like way more angsty than anyone gives it credit for. The Texas Chainsaw 2003 remake features Meshuggah, Morbid Angel, Lamb of God, Fear Factory, and more, and that's just like way cooler than it has any right being. Music like this gives scenes a very unique flavor of energy and excitement that can't really be substituted for anything else. There's a scene in Freddy vs. Jason where Laurie is talking about how much she hates Freddy and she needs to see him die, and that speech with this music swelling in the background worked. In context, it was actually really hype and cool. It very easily could have become cringe, but it wasn't. And the credits roll to this song that's just so unnecessarily cool. It's awesome. It is a fun post-scream slasher that feels like a wrestling match, and it has this soundtrack. Hell yeah moment, just full of them. The Resident Evil movies are another prime example of interesting and badass creative choices. Slipknot for the end credits, Mudvayne, Depeche Mode, Rammstein. This movie has a hot girl kicking a zombie dog in the face to the song Fist F by Nine Inch Nails. This is just objectively so much cooler and more interesting than Shazam 2. Oh man, I wonder why this industry is imploding. Beats me. Anyways, let's do a Harold and the Purple Crayon movie. That's what folks want to see. This movie also features an original score by Marilyn Manson, but a lot of sources just credit Marco, and some even cite Tim Skold, but it's probably just a Frankenstein concoction of everyone. It's hard to tell with stuff like this because there's also a marketing aspect to it. They're just gonna pin whatever is the most noteworthy name in order to generate the most hype. Like, Joey Jordison actually did a remix for the soundtrack, but it's just credited as Slipknot remix, which isn't inaccurate, but it's definitely stretching the truth, especially now. Regardless, however, it doesn't matter if you're a fan of all of these artists or whether or not some of them have aged more poorly than others. It is pretty undeniable that these are all pretty kick-ass soundtracks that complement the movie extremely well. There's also the sequel to Resident Evil that goes just as, if not more, crazy. But despite these soundtracks coming up a lot in a lot of discussions surrounding movies with cool soundtracks, if you actually, watch the movie, almost none of these songs are really featured. End credits, totally, but during the actual movie, I swear I didn't hear a single one of these songs a single goddamn time. There was even a scene where apparently both of these songs played. I watched the scene 3 times trying to catch it. I didn't hear anything. There was a guy playing music on his headphones for 2 seconds, but it's playing so quietly and muffled that I don't know which song it is, and even if that pitiful cameo counts as one of the songs, what about the other one? Despite some of these soundtracks being very cool, their importance to the overall movie is oftentimes extremely overstated. All this was, for the most part, was a gimmick to sell CDs and have a cool end credit song, which granted is better than nothing, but I don't think it is as significant as we give it credit for. One of these examples is the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack, which does get praised for being really cool, and it really isn't, if I'm being real. Granted, it does lean significantly more wearing sunglasses indoors type vibe in comparison to every other Mission Impossible movie, but in relation to how much of these songs actually relate to the movie, it's hilariously minimal. It has Metallica's I Disappear as the end credits, which on paper is cool, but it's really not that good, if I'm being real. That song kind of sucks. And the only other noteworthy song that was actually featured in the movie itself, and not just the credits, is Limp Bizkit's Take a Look Around, which is something, but not really. If you don't know anything about the song, it is primarily based around being a cover of the Mission Impossible theme, and the version they use in the movie is an instrumental version, and the one part of the song that does feature like a bouncy nu metal riff does not make an appearance in the movie at all. So it is in the movie, but just barely, and it is the tamest possible version of it. It is essentially just Mission Impossible themed guitar cover with a bunch of marketing clout and free promotion behind it. As much as all these track listings would lead you to believe, oftentimes songs would not really be prominently featured in any substantial way, mostly just being relegated to playing muffled in the background for 3 seconds. It's still something you see occasionally, although not as frequent, and sometimes there would be music inspired by the movie that never actually show up in the movie itself and just tangentially related due to vibes, I guess. Maybe just a lot of horror movie producers and record label owners were buddy-buddy and it was kind of a you scratch my back, I scratch yours type thing. I know Roadrunner Records was directly involved in the Resident Evil compilation CDs, but I don't know. I think that it's not just a cultural shift, but there was almost definitely an additional business side to this as well. As much as I think inspired by soundtracks are actually pretty cool, digital playlists kind of make this novelty pretty functionally useless, unless if you wanted the exact same thing but more inconvenient and costs more money. And don't get me wrong, I love physical media, support artists, but let's be realistic, most people are just going to do whatever is cheaper and easier, and that's Spotify. Movie tie-ins were a much bigger deal prior to 2006 because it was one of the only ways where bands like this could get widespread promotion. But when the internet and MySpace started to become more feasible options, from a record label standpoint, why would you try and push your music to be in The Accountant 2 when you could instead divert that exact same amount of time and energy into creating a viral TikTok sound? It might be objectively lamer, but business-wise, significantly more smarter in just about every single way. Compilation CDs in general were absolute lifesavers if you're on a road trip in 1998 with your printout map listening to Buzz Ballads or Rocktopia, but it's not 1998. You just use your phone for all of it because of course you do. So much like how the death of iTunes was the final nail in the coffin of silly YouTuber music, the death of the compilation CD made for the movie soundtrack tie-in to be kind of a pointless endeavor if your goal is making money, which, spoiler alert, is the goal most of the time. And I don't think that it helps that a lot of these movies, frankly, are kind of dog shit. Don't get me wrong, some of them I really enjoyed, but I think most of them were pretty critically panned, and some of them I'd agree with. Mission Impossible 2 is written by 2 writers who have never made an action or espionage-based movie prior to this, and boy does it show. The first Mission Impossible literally had 20 moments that made me go, ooh! Oh, that was a close one. But Mission Impossible 2, the extreme edgy one, might I add, is 80% a romance between 2 characters that have 0 chemistry. Cue the Metallica, I guess. Spawn is like the Crow, but with spikes and chains embedded into his flesh. At its core, it is a very badass and edgy gothic take on the superhero franchise, but it is also directed by the guy who made Marmaduke and multiple Garfield movies. And the quality is about is about what you'd expect. Most of the hypeness comes from its themes, nu metal, and someone moving quickly with a low shutter speed. What it was going for was awesome, but what we got is not that. Underworld and its sequel have pretty damn good soundtracks, but once again, its presence in the actual movies themselves are extremely underwhelming. There are a few cool moments when someone turns on a radio or whatever, but if it's not barely noticeable in the background, none of these songs really get a spotlight in any noteworthy way. This is in contrast to video games, where in order to build on the power fantasy, oftentimes the music will get much more of a spotlight, so you can feel like you're almost starring in your own super badass music video or whatever. But movies are kind of allergic to playing a song at a reasonable volume for longer than 4 seconds for some reason. So when something like Underworld actually decides to do something really cool, like have a gunfight between vampires and werewolves while a drum and bass remix of Slipknot is playing, most of that gets kind of nerfed almost completely, whereas a video game executing this exact same concept would be much more music forward. Do you get what I mean? Anyways, Matt Damon said in a Hot Ones interview, this is relevant, I promise, he explained how the death of physical media has kind of killed the middle budget movie. That's why everything now pretty much seems to boil down to very small productions and $30 million productions with somehow basically nothing in between. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but we all know what I'm talking about. It is this widening of the gap that leads to very expensive movies playing it as safe as humanly possible as to not alienate anyone ever, because God forbid they make less than $1 billion, even though that keeps not working, and really cool smaller movies that you're just never gonna go see because you've never even heard of it. So from a pure financial standpoint, from where we are currently, why the hell would you put Sanguisuga Bog in your $150 million movie? It's just never gonna happen. And when the only current alternative is doomed into obscurity, even if it does end up happening, you're probably not gonna know about it. And this exact situation almost one-to-one directly applies to video games as well. Games like this just don't get made anymore, but if they do get made, it's either being made by one, a solo developer as an indie passion project with no budget, or two, a AAA open-world Ubisoft game that's broken at launch and is 65% microtransactions. And either way, Jesus Piece is probably not going to be in it. And if it was, you'd probably have to buy a season's pass in order to unlock the ability to buy it as a microtransaction, because capitalism is just so dope. Nowadays, a lot of stuff is orchestral, which is fine, but like, does everything need to be orchestral, you know? And there's exceptions, obviously, like having Trent Reznor do everything, which is great, but like, those are seemingly the only two flavors. Regardless of me enjoying one of them, the pickings are pretty fucking slim. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, and orchestral has been the standard from the very beginning and has totally produced tons of bangers. Here's all of my favorites. Shout out to Pee Wee Herman specifically. Dude, that song was crazy. But the outliers in a sea of orchestral were so unique and stood out so much that their absence can be felt. You know what I mean? There's a reason why all of these soundtracks are still held in high regard, whereas not even 1% of that energy is being put towards modern soundtracks. Have you thought about any of these? I can guarantee you haven't. Extreme soundtracks and the extreme culture paired with it were inescapable for the longest time. And although I've touched to a few reasons as to why it's had a bit of a decline, now I feel like it's time to fully discuss why it went away. Alright, so we've already established that the universal abandonment of compilation CDs means that financially doing something like this is pretty pointless. Artistically, it's cool, which is why we get some more experimental films like Gummo with a great soundtrack, but when it comes to great big Hollywood films, if something doesn't make money, they are dropping it entirely, and the financial benefit of doing a various artist soundtrack just does not really exist anymore. I think a great compromise between the two can be found within the framework of the Queen of the Damned soundtrack, but there's still the issue that most scores need to be in the background and not draw too much attention, so every song can't necessarily be a needle drop, so something like this would only work if it was like half ambient, more low-key instrumental artists in addition to big names. Then you could have a nice blend, maybe. But that would get messy so easily, and it'd be hard to maintain a consistent sound, so why not just hire someone who can do it all, like Trent Reznor. That's why he's in everything. Okay, alright. Hollywood's ahead of me on this one. That being said, however, watching movies like these showed me that needle drops can be more than just the same 10 songs. I mean, can you picture someone picking up a chainsaw and then Bleed by Meshuggah starts playing? That would honestly go crazy. I feel like that's such a no-brainer. But this leads me to my next point, which is that the industry, both movies, television, and video games, is in a very bad state and just frankly does not want to take risks. Which I know sounds like pessimism, but if you've been paying attention to any of these industries in the past little bit, you know that things are pretty bleak. If you fail, you get laid off. If you make something that's really successful and makes a lot of money, you still get laid off. It's awesome. So of course we're not gonna get a graffiti simulator with enough budget to have Green Day on the soundtrack in the current year, you know? That's really something that could only be made in the 2005 industry. Also, the music industry as a whole has no real interest in heavy things at the moment. Definitely not in comparison to the nu metal boom of the 2000s. And if the larger industry is not interested, then the money and the brand deals also leave with it. That's just kind of how it works. Mortal Kombat was marketed this way not because it fits the best, but because it's popular. It's a safe bet. It would be totally different if you couldn't go 5 minutes without seeing Fred Durst or Marilyn Manson pop up on MTV, but culture has shifted since then. But here's the thing. I don't really think it has that much. With how unapologetically commercialized metalcore has gotten within the past few years, playing stadiums, bands with the sole purpose of being a trending TikTok sound, books, the fetishization of goth girls is at like an all-time high, there is a legitimate demand for music and culture with an edge. I mean, if you told me in 2016 that Courtney would be at the Grammys with an I Wrestled a Bear Once split off performing their collab with Megan Thee Stallion at Coachella, I would assume you were having a stroke of some kind. Not because she's not amazingly talented, she is, but because that would require a fundamentally different society. One that I guess we're in now. Poppy is doing collabs with fucking Roblox, Ghostmane is playing at Madison Square Garden, Gojira is playing at the fucking Olympics. Obviously this is all different and it's still not Limp Bizkit Lollapalooza level, but the fact that media is embracing this so heavily while simultaneously being borderline scared of having guitars and soundtracks is extremely odd. Even an extreme overcorrection wouldn't explain the almost complete abandonment of extremity in media. It's a real chicken or the egg scenario. Is extreme music getting shoved in our faces less because it's not as popular, or is it not as popular because it's not getting pushed in mainstream media near as much? I mean, pop culture is defined by the media, so which came first? I mean, are we really going to convince ourselves that studios are good at knowing what people want and giving it to them? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been significantly more misses than hits. In the past handful of years, I've seen Knocked Loose go from playing shows like this to shows like this. Slipknot is still playing just as many amphitheaters as they were in 2005. And hell, Knotfest wasn't even a thing prior to 2012, and that festival has only gotten bigger every single year. All of this can still get done without being in some 14% on Rotten Tomatoes action movie. I just don't understand why larger media avoids it like the plague, unless if they have a Grammy nomination. I mean, I do understand. I understand completely. It's just annoying. And I want to complain about it. So I still think it's worth breaking down why it is this way. There are three main reasons I could think of. One, if you can't profit off of a recognizable name, business-wise, it's not worth it. Two, conservatives will cry about it and call it witchcraft because that's their go-to for anything they don't understand, which, you know, is most things. And three, people just aren't particularly interested in moving things forward or capitalizing off of what is currently popular, when capitalizing off of nostalgia is way more financially safe, as well as maintaining some edge, but in a safe, recognizable way so it doesn't actually, you know, scare anyone. Like, let's be real, it is pretty fucking absurd that the modern day equivalent of these types of soundtracks are almost literally the exact same track listing. Like, I get it, it makes sense or whatever, but like, come on, you know that new music has come out within the last 20 years. Please tell me you know that, right? And that leads me to my next point, which is like, why not exploit bands? I highly doubt that Hans Zimmer is less expensive than Wrist Meet Razor, you know what I mean? I know various artists' soundtracks aren't exactly cheap, but I think it is by comparison significantly less expensive than hiring a composer who's won every award ever. I can say with 100% certainty that there are tons of smaller artists who would love to be included in larger projects. Like if A24 was like, we're making Annihilation 2 or whatever, and we think this song might work pretty good as background music for this one scene, we could pay you like $1,000. I would be like, $1,000? That's more money than this project has ever made in total, I'm pretty sure. Let me sign a bunch of paperwork without reading it. As long as the movie or the game or whatever is cool, there are so many artists who would be more than happy to be exploited and underpaid as long as they get to be a part of it. I know the nice way of saying this is studios should take a chance on smaller artists, but we all know that that's not gonna happen. Smaller artists would love to be exploited is infinitely more appealing to companies. I know nostalgia is a hell of a drug and playing it safe is the smartest move on paper, but that's not exactly working out, now is it? The desire to capitalize off of what's already popular is a no-brainer. It makes complete sense, but it also results in stagnation where no one is trying to be the next big thing. They're just trying to list things that you vaguely remember from your childhood so they could be loosely associated with something for money. It breeds a culture where innovation is shunned and piggybacking off of previous successes is the smartest move. And I don't want to be too negative, but like, this sucks ass, man. I hate this. And using this as an example, even when we do get some genuinely funny, surprisingly niche cuts in popular media, it's still a reference from 2009. So, you know, it's like, come on. But on the flip side, as much as I enjoy fun representation, maybe it's a good thing we don't have the metal equivalent of Marshmallow is Turtle and Rihanna is Smurfette. Maybe it's a blessing that Hollywood has decided to ignore heavier genres if, you know, this is what we get. I do have a few other theories on why this kind of thing is not near as popular, however, so I'm just going to rattle them off real quick. One is oversaturation. I touched on it a little bit already, but there was a lot of examples of extreme soundtracks and extreme games, and as cool as they are, most of the games just boiled down to two categories, and most of the movies boiled down to bad sequels, so not only was there a lot, but it wasn't particularly top shelf. Don't get me wrong, I love pretty much all of these games, but in combination with MTV playing Limp Bizkit every 30 seconds, some oversaturation is inevitable. The Tony Hawk Pro Skater remakes are doing well, however, so I think we're well beyond the point of this commercial oversaturation. Number two, the Xbox's identity was heavily tied with teenage boy, extreme Axe body spray commercial type shit, and eventually pivoted to way more general audiences. It makes sense why they did this, obviously, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that when a major console's brand is heavily associated with being extreme, naturally that means that there's going to be a lot more money put into extreme games, as to the essentially zero industry drive that exists currently. I'm using Xbox for this example, but PlayStation has also noticeably softened its marketing tone as well. And I know I already showed footage of it briefly, but like even Nintendo, the super safe, squeaky clean, family-friendly company, had the Wild Boys promote the DS. Every single company that's behind the drive of what kind of games get made are not interested in associating with extreme culture at all anymore. This leads me to point number three, which is that companies were probably feeling the pressure of the think of the children outrage. When it comes to video games, encouraging people to do dangerous sports where you could get hurt while listening to the devil's music combined with crass humor is gonna upset a lot of, you know, parents. And just to be completely blunt, nothing has made driving dangerously into oncoming traffic and ramming into strangers feel more cool than in Burnout Revenge. And that's just a fact. But outside of video games, remember how I said that Nitro Circus is just Jackass but with a legitimate risk of death? Well, that's all good fun on paper, except for there's one thing I left out. It's people have actually died. And despite it not really being the show's fault, it doesn't really matter how many warnings there are. I know everyone got ideas when watching stuff like this, and sometimes it doesn't work out well. Although the unwillingness to play it safe undoubtedly makes for top shelf entertainment, it also guarantees that it probably won't be around for long. It's just kind of an unfortunate inevitability. Those are more serious examples, but that leads me to number four, which is just 2000's mall goth aesthetic is significantly more visually striking than modern metalcore. Although the two are not the same, I would argue that it is the modern equivalent of filling this niche with an edgy yet still commercially successful soundtracks. Regardless of how you feel personally about the two styles, the mall goth aesthetic, even when executed poorly, is 1,000,000,000% more interesting than four white guys with the same fade standing in front of Titan tubes in a concrete room doing their best Periphery impression. Or just to put it bluntly, this shit has no swag in comparison. This looks like if a millennial burger joint was was a group of people. So many modern metalcore band photos look like a royalty-free rock and roll Gap commercial, and it's fucked up that that's true. So if a filmmaker or a game wanted to tap into one of these aesthetics for a project, it's a pretty fucking easy choice to not move forward with popular edgy culture and choose something set in the 90s or something else altogether. It's just visually disinteresting, too polished to feel authentic, too accessible to be a legitimate statement. And that leads me to number 5, which is that if extreme music fans feel like they're being inauthentically pandered to, we fucking hate it. The desire to keep things more tightly knit and underground can cause people to lash out, and I both understand that completely and also acknowledge that it is a little bit childish. A lot of subcultures usually tend to get rubbed the wrong way when an actor is pretending to be involved in it, even if they have good intent. It's both childish and completely understandable at the same time. You know, people don't really like it when their interests get corporatified in a way that feels disingenuous. Like, Lords of Chaos is a decent movie. It's fine. But no one hates it more than black metal fans. Like, Jesus Christ. I've met punks that absolutely hate Matthew Lillard's portrayal of the subculture in SLC Punk, and like 100% of those people look and act exactly like this character. And I've heard people complain that Deathgasm was too corny and that the characters were dorky, but it's like, bro, with all due respect, have you looked into a goddamn mirror? Don't get me wrong, some of these movies do have legitimate problems and some ideological aspects that I disagree with, but even then some people need to, like, chill out. It's not that serious. But movies like Green Room, Bomb City, and The Sound of Metal, I haven't really seen get any inkling of hate. Mostly just because the focus isn't just on extreme music or the subculture itself, that is merely just an added spice or backdrop instead of the main course. So there are obviously more ideal balances to strike, but overall, trying to pander to audiences like these will result in some pushback just because it matters a lot to a lot of people. Sometimes fans will just throw a hissy fit if someone sells out, which I completely understand. I've done that, but I don't really think anyone's mad that 18 Visions is in the driving extremely fast, running into cars nitro explosion game. That's just pretty fucking awesome, man. Extreme soundtracks and extreme games are a perfect match for a reason that I don't really think anyone has a real problem with. And number 6, maybe, just maybe, watching grown men jumping into sewage for a laugh is just not setting a lasting precedent moving forward. As much as it pains me to admit, I think it's worth acknowledging that maybe the fart mask just doesn't have that much media longevity. Don't get me wrong, I love Street Bike Tommy, but are we really gonna say in good faith that he's the next big star? I know hindsight is 20/20, but I'm gonna go ahead and say no, and I think he would agree with me on this. Society loves freak shows, and it loves violence. It always has, and it always will, while simultaneously convincing itself that it doesn't. Everyone thinks the little toy car bit is funny, but most productive members of society probably don't want to admit that to themselves. When I say that the unwillingness to play it safe limits its longevity in terms of production, it also limits its longevity in terms of cultural standing. But all of that being said, there are still some modern examples worth examining. Some record labels still have direct involvement with some movie production, and I'm not actually sure how successful these were, but they do exist. Although not extreme in a guitar way, pretty much the entire soundtrack to The Substance makes for tons of hell yeah moments. Not only was the composer picked because Farja wanted some electronic violence, but the music itself is not entirely relegated to when someone turns on the radio for 2 seconds. It is noticeably higher in the mix in a way that felt refreshing throughout the entire movie. And although neither of these are particularly extreme examples, I do feel like it's worth acknowledging that both Kate Bush and Nirvana both got really noticeable streaming spikes from being in Stranger Things and The Batman, thus proving that even though this method of promotion may be outdated, it still works when used appropriately. And in terms of thematic extremity for dangerous slapstick media, we got Jackass 4 and 4.5 that came out, as well as a few other Johnny Knoxville spin-offs, but those aren't particularly, new anymore. There's Ridiculousness and all of its spin-offs, which are also a product of Dick House, which, although technically counts, feels too detached and sterile for it to really feel like it should count. Overall, there's not zero modern examples of dangerous mainstream media, but it has decreased by an insane amount. The only definitive new addition I could think of is the Eric Andre show, which did have a bit with Exhumed I thought was pretty good, but it's not exactly brand new either, you know? And although only tangentially related to extreme media, I do feel like it's worth acknowledging that edgy sex comedies were inescapable at one point, but is now essentially just dead. There are some examples still, obviously, but in terms of cultural impact, I mean, it's not even a competition. There was also the larger vampire craze that featured a lot of movies both with and without a noteworthy soundtrack. Even though this is a trend that has come and gone and plenty of these movies didn't really receive great ratings, no one ever had a problem with gothic architecture and dark themes, so I don't really understand the shift away from it entirely. It's like a discontinued flavor of a thing you used to love and you'd wish they'd bring it back, but like, with movies. Regardless about how you feel about all of it, there was a lot of noteworthy gothic visual influence throughout Hollywood that I've only really seen be captured by movies like A Pale Blue Eye and Nosferatu. But speaking of which, both Nosferatu and Sinners are two amazing modern examples of what is hopefully a resurgence of vampire media, but I think we can all agree if they replaced the blues with She Passed Away, that would kind of betray the vision and time period entirely. And although Nosferatu is very gothic, if The Cure was playing during the end credits, although on paper that would be cool, that would fundamentally go against what the film is going for. Full symphonic and period accurate does absolutely serve its point, and in these cases it serves its point super well, but not everything is as serious and dread-filled and frankly as good as these movies. But for every Mission Impossible or Nosferatu, you get like 2,000 instantly forgettable 20% on Rotten Tomatoes type movies. You could definitely throw in some fun tracks in some of those. I mean, come on. Sometimes if you want to make something badass and fun, you need sick riffs. And I feel like a lot of people making movies have totally forgotten that that's a tool that they have at their disposal. And when it comes to the gaming industry, there are still plenty of really cool soundtracks, but there's not a lot of particularly great extreme examples, you know? There are still some, however, and some of these games are just blatantly harkening back to an earlier era, but games that do a great job showcasing a large number of artists pretty much only exist in Grand Theft Auto's radio and its copycats. But regardless of what studios tell you you would like to see, people yearn for off-the-wall humor, edgy bullshit, and gothic horror. But the interest in greenlighting these projects is uncharacteristically low. I guess those CEOs are too busy giving themselves a 30% raise while laying off half their staff to be in touch with what young people are into nowadays. Understandable. But regardless, as much as this video is being made purely to celebrate cool soundtracks and extreme media, I'm also very disappointed with the lack of both in the modern era. There are still games where you race while listening to music, but it's just so sterile in comparison. Literally every song on this OST sounds like it should be playing in various stores of a mall. I know on paper it kinda looks like it might have some edge to it, but just sit down and listen to it, and then picture yourself in a mall. and it fits perfectly, and it's not... I understand that it's safer, but like, what happened to having fun? So do yourself and the world a favor and make something cool this summer. Make something extreme. Make something that's radical and that pushes boundaries. Stop giving a shit if it's cringe or if it's rough around the edges. It's stuff like that that makes it special and gives it character to begin with. Don't wait for other people to make the shit that you want to see. Do it yourself. So, as cheesy as it sounds, you owe it to yourself to get out there and make something extreme. Make something new. Make something that makes an old person angry, because that's fun. And if you don't, then you'd always just hire Trent Reznor to do it for you, I guess. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing so I could hopefully pass the 100K mark. That would be really crazy. The economy is in shambles, so if you can't afford to buy some merch, please at least consider doing these things. They are free. They also help me out a bunch. But speaking of financial support, thank you very much to all my highest tier patrons for making videos like these even possible to begin with. Big kisses to all of you. And to all my middle tier patrons who get a medium-sized kiss. Thank you as well. A lot of the research for this video was done live on Twitch, and I stream every week over there, so follow me if you want. It's incredibly fun. Or just have me on in the background while you scroll on your phone. That works too. I don't really care. I know that this video is probably biting off more than I can chew. Pretty much every category I talked about could be an entire video on its own, but so much of it shared similarities that I wanted to talk about all of it at once, even though I probably made it 10 times harder on myself. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, stay extreme. I get, whatever. Love you. Bye.